Hello and welcome to this lesson on calculating percentages in Excel. Now this is the last lesson of us writing raw formulas before we start talking about functions, and this is possibly one of the most common reasons to write a formula, because working with percentages is just such a common thing from life. You think about tax, you think about inflation, discounts, profit margins, percentage variance, bonuses, commissions. There's so many examples that it's hard to get through a day without seeing, multiple percentages, and maybe even doing your own little calculations, even if away from Excel, like if you're shopping or something. But that makes it very important in Excel. So let's have a look at doing these formulas. Got a few examples to go through. Example number 1 is in cell D4 here. I would like to calculate what 15%, what value is 15% of the value in B4, which is 500, as we can see currently. So in cell D4, we will type equals B4, the value of interest, and we're going to multiply it by 15%. Now, there's many ways that you can calculate percentages within Excel. This is arguably the easiest, most straightforward way. And to find out what 50% of that value is, I could simply just multiply that value by 15%. Or indeed, in an example like this, I could even multiply it by the cell above, because that says 15% in it. But anyway, not to deviate too much, let me type that back in and press enter, and apparently 15% of 500 is 75. Now, just to mention, if I was to double click on that cell, another way of doing it, which is not uncommon for people in my classes to mention, is to use the decimal form. And there's normally at least one person in the class who actually prefers that. Maybe it's the way they were taught or whatnot. But 0.15, 15%, same thing. Whether you prefer it in decimal form, or I believe the majority will prefer it in percentage form. So let me change that back. And I guess the key thing to take from this is that Excel knows what that thing is, that percentage symbol, meaning that we can create user-friendly formulas, or fairly user-friendly formulas. Let's start looking at the others. Next up, we want to increase the value in B7 by 15%. And one of the brilliant ways about working out the previous formula in the way we did is that it's very easy to adapt for other common requirements, such as this one, where we want to increase by 15%. I can simply multiply the value by 115%. So to increase it by 15, I'll put 15% on top of itself being 100, so 115% will show a 15% increase. We already know 15% is 75, so not too difficult maths there to know 500 plus 575, plus 75 is 575. So we can see that it's worked a dream. And a similar story for decreasing, a kind of maybe discount scenario in life. I could do equals B10, the value in question here, and multiply it by 90%. So to find out what 10% off that value is, to find out what 90% of the value is, that would be the same thing, that is equal. And that is apparently 450. 10% this time, remember. Okay, next up now we've got an example where I want to know what that value in cell D13 is as a percentage of the value in B13. So what is 70 as a percentage of 500? Well, what we'll do is we'll do equals the value in D13, the one that I wish to know what it is as a percentage, and I'm going to divide it, remember the / for dividing, by the value in B13. Now when we do that, that will return the correct answer, just that alone. No multiplying this time. but it returns the answer in a decimal form. So the answer is 14%. It's displaying it as 0.14. I may well be happy with that. If not, I could select that cell, as I already have. Let me do that again. And click the percentage button. You get about halfway along the Home tab. The percent style is applied, and now it just looks a little bit more appropriate as 14%. Okay, final example here. We can't run through every possible permutation of how percentages are used, but the one to finish on will be trying to represent a percentage increase and decrease. So typical scenario being that the value in B16 may be last year's sales or last week's sales, and the value in D16 might be this year's sales or this week's sales. And you're just trying to see the difference, if there's been an improvement or a decrease. So to do this, I could do equals the value which I want to know whether it's an increase or decrease, and I'm going to subtract. So remember the hyphen symbol to take away or subtract kind of last week's or last year's kind of value, B16 in this case. And once I've subtracted that, I'm then going to divide it by the last year or the kind of last week's value, so B13 again. Sorry, B16 again. Now, this example is not finished yet. This has produced a lovely moment for me to recap on the previous lesson of BODMAS and the order of calculation, because hopefully you've thought at this point that that second part will run first. It always divides before it subtracts in Excel. So what I need to do is wrap brackets around that first part. It will always multiply or divide before it adds or subtracts. So I'm going to say, look, do that calculation, then divide it by B16 when you are finished. So I'll press enter. The answer is 20%. Let me use my percent style button to tidy that up. And you could probably tell that through the rather simple values there to use the demonstration. And if I was to change the D16 maybe to let's say 450, it now tells me that was a decrease on 10%. Sales are 10% down from the previous year. We'll get back to 600 maybe, they're 20% up, and so on and so forth. So last example there, so 5 examples all in all of typical Excel tasks for calculating percentages. Helps us to get a feel for writing formulas, hopefully building our confidence, building our skills. The more we write this stuff and the more we do. Next lesson is when we start to look at functions.